Yes, hello and welcome to the Wildcard Rewind. Week 5 is done. The NFL needs to slow down. I feel like we're flying through it a bit quick. We are here Monday night. Let's get into it.
I just wanna rewind to when we were young at heart. Back to all those good times. Take me back to the start.
Oh, it is a Monday night. That intro was absolutely awful by myself. I couldn't find the intro music video button to press and all of that. So we're off to a great start. I am joined by my two amazing co-hosts. I have Lewis and Hannah with me. I will bring them both in. Lewis, how are you doing on this Monday night?
Absolutely fantastic. Had a really fun slate last night, actually, especially the defensive and special teams nightmares of the late slate. That was really good fun. But yeah, I am absolutely buzzing and very excited to talk about some football that isn't the LA Rams.
Amazing. Hannah, how about yourself?
Well, I'm currently in a deep depression, after yesterday's event versus the Ravens. But hey, you got to get up and carry on, don't you? I support a terrible team. What can I do? Move on and let's talk about fantasy and all the other great teams. The only good thing that I've got to say is that we've currently got the number 2 overall pick in the draft. So I was like, at least if we can either keep that or get in the playoffs and get to Super Bowl, they're my 2 things that I would like for the season. That's my wish casting.
I have to say that is one extreme to the other. We either keep the number 2 pick or we go to the Super Bowl. And I just wish I supported a team that could make that decision and go, we're either going to have the number 2 pick or we're going to the Super Bowl, I'm absolutely buzzing that
You would be.
49ers were beat, So Kyler Murray, what a guy, what a legend. But yeah, so it's been a good weekend, and I have to say, I think I've heard the craziest and most amazing stat ever, and that is that Dak Prescott is the first guy and first player ever to throw 2 interceptions in one game in 2 different days. So because of how late they played the game, he threw 1 interception on Sunday night and 1 interception on Monday morning. And I just think that is the best stat ever. And you are not beating that. So I wanted to bring that in. But yeah, we will move on to the big news of the week. And we'll start off with reminding everyone that it is bye-week season. So this week we have the Chiefs, the Rams, the Dolphins, and the undefeated Minnesota Vikings on bye this week. So that should be fun. And we'll start off now with some injuries. And first of all, I want to go to one of the big players that went down this week, and that is Nico Collins. He went off with a hamstring injury. And looking on X, they're saying he's day to day, but as it's a re-aggravation, I'm a little bit worried about that. What do you guys think? Do you think he plays in week 6 or not? And if he doesn't play, is there any other interest in any other receivers or anything that you could put in instead of him?
First of all, I think it's quite sad for Nico if he does miss time, because I had a look at currently his pace. Obviously he's currently the wide receiver 1 on the season and the yardage leader in the NFL, but his pace currently was 108 receptions, 1,927 yards, and 10 touchdowns. So if he did play every single game, there's a chance he could actually break the 2,000 yardage mark, which is insane. I am a little worried about him. Firstly, because it's a re-injury. He was questionable coming in, and then the moment he tweaked his hamstring, he was taken out for the rest of the game. But also a little bit worried about next week, just because it's a long season. The Texans have plenty of wide receivers, and it's probably in their best interest to bench their best one for 1 week. So my presumption, not being a doctor, would be that he probably doesn't play. In terms of am I interested in the rest of the wide receiver core? Yes, definitely. Stephon Diggs has had a really interesting season where he's not been hugely efficient, but he's getting a huge amount of volume. So he's always performing as a high end wide receiver too. Tank Dell also coming back from injury, definitely of interest. The one that is quite interesting is their wide receiver 3, Xavier Hutchinson. Actually just sort of stepped up into the Nico Collins role. And that could be an interesting one if you're really struggling with bye weeks, that he might actually have a role next week. But definitely like Stephon Diggs, especially, I think probably gets, I would be surprised if he doesn't get double-digit targets next week if Nico does miss time.
Yeah, what about yourself, Hannah?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Lewis, really. I think ultimately it's probably just going to be shared out, probably more between Diggs and Dell. But obviously, like you say, maybe some of these peripheral pass catchers might have a little bit of a role. You know, we're getting into bye weeks, so desperation does come in. So like Lewis said, there may be a couple of guys like Xavier Hutchinson that you might be able to squeeze in and give you a few fantasy points, you know, or, you know, a touchdown would be fab, wouldn't it? So, yeah, no, I agree. I don't think there's anyone that totally stands out that I'm like, oh, you know, you must start. I think if I have Dell or Diggs, I'd start them, you know, and I think ultimately they'll get more work than with Nico, who's been doing fantastic.
Yeah, I also think they're playing the Patriots next week, and I think they could win that game without Nico Collins. You know, I think ultimately, like you said, Lewis, it is a long season, and we do want to see him continue his pace and, you know, get to that 2,000 mark. We'd all love to see it, but I think, you know, we're looking at it as a fantasy based thing, whereas they'll look at it from an NFL side and go, do you know what, we could probably win this game without him. Give him that week off that he might need. You know, I don't think he's torn anything or anything like that, so I don't think it's looking like he's going to miss big time. It may be just a bit of a tweak, and it may be just a sort of give him a week off, or even if they play him, it may be sort of like a limited role and just sort of go, we're going to put you out there, but we're not really going to push you hard at all, and just sort of just get him out there as a bit of a bluff kind of thing, you know. So I don't know, one to monitor though, you know. I think we say this all the time, but like keep an eye on practice and what sort of goes on. You'll see what his usage is like all week. And I think if he doesn't practice much this week, I think he'll be one that's going to miss next week. One of the other big injuries. Go on, Lewis.
Sorry, do you mind if I just quickly come in on Nico? One of the other things definitely worth highlighting is like hamstrings and soft tissue injuries generally are really easy to re-aggravate. So that's one of the reasons I think they'll probably sit him. And if they don't, if he does play, now Nico Collins has one of the highest ADOTs in the league. I don't think they'll want him running full length field sprints on a hamstring. That's how you re-aggravate it, is when you like properly open up your gate. So I think like the chance, if he plays, the chance of re-aggravation is pretty high. So I think even if he plays, I'd probably be too concerned to start him again in week 6.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like I said, I just think if he's out there, they don't use him that much. And I think if they were playing somebody, you know, like a tough team for them, I think they may look at using him. But I think because it's the Patriots and they're not great this season, I think they sort of go, do you know what, we can roll without you this week. Have a week off. And yeah, so moving on to the one of the next injuries, that was Aaron Jones. He went down in the London game, and he suffered a hip injury. And I don't know if you guys have seen anything since, but the last I seen, they were waiting to undergo an MRI. But the Vikings do have a bye week, which is going to like sort of be quite handy for him. Are you worried about this hip injury? Do you think it's maybe? Do you reckon there's a way that you could use this to your advantage? The fact that they are in a bye week and people are probably not worried about it that much at the moment. Who wants to go first? Hannah, you can go first this time because Lewis went first last time. Go on.
Sure. You know, he is an older running back, you know, so I think these injuries probably do take their toll and can linger. We know that Aaron Jones has had a few injuries in the past. I think he missed quite a few games last season, came back obviously just in time for the playoffs pretty much, and he was awesome. But I do think often when he does go down, he he does end up missing multiple weeks. So I think there is a chance that he might not be ready for week 7. I think we just have to kind of wait and see. I think an MRI always makes me a bit nervous. That makes me think that they think there might be more damage than just like a bruise or something superficial like that. So we may have more clarity even before we get into kind of week 6 as to what's going on. Obviously, we know that Ty Chandler has been involved in this backfield, not too much, but he has been kind of that second running back in this situation. So, ultimately he would be the ad. Some people in, deep leagues, probably he's not going to be on waivers, but these shallow leagues, if you have room, then I would consider adding him now because he's probably going to be reasonably cheap while people still think that Aaron Jones might be okay because of the bye, etc., etc. So you might be able to squeeze him on for, single digit fab. Whereas once it gets to week 7 and there's more clarity and there may be confirmation that he's going to be out, you're going to have to pay quite a lot more for Ty Chandler. So I think now's the time to add him if you've got space on your bench versus next week when I think he's going to cost you a lot more if Aaron Jones is confirmed to be out.
Yeah. Do you agree, Lewis?
Yeah, it's basically exactly what I was going to say. Like, because the Vikings are on bye next week, people aren't going to be targeting Ty Chandler because they're going to have their own running backs to replace. If you've got the Kyren Williams owner or someone starting Kareem Hunt this week, like you're going to go out and target other running backs. If you have space on your bench, it's worth stashing Ty Chandler for the week to just see. He saw a significant amount of the workload. He wasn't great with it, but then the Jets have a good run defense. But he basically saw the entirety of the workload except the goal line carry to CJ Ham yesterday against the Jets. So if Aaron Jones does go out, I don't think it's a committee. I think Ty Chandler just takes the majority of the work. So I would definitely pick him up, stash him. And then if next week we find out that Aaron Jones is fine, you can drop him and it doesn't affect anything.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was thinking along the same lines as both of you. It is worth thinking ahead, and the fact that the Vikings are on a bye, that may play into your hands. And if you can pick him up, go for it. And like you said, Lewis, if in a week's time the Aaron Jones is back practicing, there was nothing to it, then you can just drop him back into the pool.
Exactly.
Is there any other big news that any of you guys want to chat about? How did you want to get the Browns off your chest, or Lewis, anything? Or we're both good?
Yeah, we're good. I'm going to leave that there, see how this week plays out. I'm sure we can have a further discussion if we see Deshaun Watson another week.
Do you like that? That was Hannah trying to be gracious. And even at the end, there still had to be like a little bit of a nibble towards how much she hates the Browns.
But I mean, to be fair, I'm quite happy if he carries on playing, right? Because, the Bengals have done pretty terribly, but at least they're the worst franchise in the AFC North.
Yeah. So I want to do something a bit. I know we sort of have a little thing to stick to and stuff, but I wanted to add something in this week. We all this offseason we all did quite a lot with charity leagues, and we tried to push quite a lot of what they are because they are a big part of what we play fantasy wise, and we all play in all these leagues. I've wrote a few down here. These are the ones that I play in. If there's any you guys want to add in this, feel free. But the ones I play in: Scott Fishbowl, JTT, the fantasy what they call the THFBB. I can't remember what it stands for. I know it's best ball, and the FFCC and the Orkney Bowl. I want to know how you guys are getting on in these leagues and whether it's going well for you or whether it's just an absolute shit show. So, Lewis, let's start with the Scott Fishbowl because I believe you are doing pretty okay in that.
I am doing pretty okay in Scott Fishbowl and not in the other. So I only play in JTT and THF. But not doing amazingly in those two. In Scott Fishbowl, I'm currently sat just waiting on this week, just outside the top 100. So I was 102nd after last week. After week 1, I was 15th. So I wanted to keep that up. But I have had another 200 plus point week. and still have my kicker left to go tonight. So I'm hoping that can rocket me back up into the top 100, but it should put me. I'll only be 5 weeks. 5 wins away from playoffs, which is pretty good going into week 6.
So what's the target for the playoffs?
13 wins. It's
13
everyone
wins.
with 13 wins, and then the rest is made up by points.
Amazing. Hannah, how are you doing in the Scott Fish Bowl, or do you want to just bypass that?
No, actually, I have had a pretty terrible start, to be fair. I'm currently 2-6. However, this week I've scored over 200 points, I'll have you know, and I'm going to win my matchup. So I'm probably going to get another 2 wins. So I'm going to have 4 wins going into week 6. So it was, to be honest, it's been quite a terrible start for me. The problem I have is that I drafted Marquise Brown, who obviously got injured on the first snap. I drafted DeAndre Hopkins, who's not been doing anything because he got injured. And then Joe Mixon's been out for ages. I drafted him. Ramondre Stevenson had quite a lull. Patty Mahomes and Travis Kelce haven't been that great. And just generally, everyone's been pretty rubbish. However, I had Garrett Wilson, who obviously was not doing anything, but this week he's redeemed himself. So is Ramondre, Brandon Ayuk, another terrible one. So everyone I had was like lull to start the season. So I'm hoping now, power up Garrett Wilson, power up Ayuk. Rico Dowdle was another guy. He seems to be getting the lion's share of the work now in that Cowboys backfield. So I'm really hoping that maybe I can right myself. Joe Mixon will come back and I might be able to sneak into the playoffs.
I hope you do. I'm currently 5-3 in the Scott Fish Bowl. I'm sort of sitting middle of the bag. I think I was around 1,500 last week. I haven't had the best week. I'm going to win my matchup, but I've only put up 158 points. But I've still got Kamara to go tonight. But my team's sort of been a bit like yours, Hannah. It started really well, and then I've got Rashee Rice on my team. I've got Puka Nacua on my team. And so I know Rashee Rice is not coming back, but hopefully Puka Nacua can, if I can keep going with a couple of wins and sneak a playoff and then get Puka Nacua back, then I'll be loving life. But I'm doing a lot better than I did last year with the Scott Fish Bowl. So let's go on to the JTT Cup. I think you both said you're playing in that one. Are you doing well in this one?
I am about to go to 2-3, which is not awful, but not great. But my team is not doing amazing. So yeah, again, I drafted Puka Nacua. Will Levis is my QB3. Obviously, he was on bye this week, but that's not worked out very well. Sam Laporta's not worked out very well. Achan potentially just injured. I have Jalen Waddle as well. So things aren't looking amazing. I do still have Josh Jacobs, Raheem Mostert, T. Higgins, CeeDee Lamb, Godwin and Baker. I've got that stack, and that's worked out pretty nicely. So the team's not awful. But I put up a pretty low score this week, and it's not looking amazing for me in JTT.
Hannah, what about yourself?
So I'm currently top of my division, 4-0, and I look like I'm going to be winning this week. And as of last week, I was like 8th in the division, so I'm in the playoff spot. This is going to be a bit tricky, though. I've got Lamar, which is great, and I've got Gino, both of which I'm quite happy with, but my wide receiver room's getting a bit thin because I have Nico, who may be out, and then I had Rashee Rice, like you did in Scott Fish Bowl. Puka Nacua, I've got an IR. AJ Brown and Devonta Smith were obviously out, so I'm looking a little bit thin on the ground there at the minute. But hey, we will see how things go. I've got Mark Andrews, who actually had a little bit of life this week, so that helped. So we'll see if I can keep going and I don't lose too many other players. What about you, Paul?
So I was just looking at, I am the 4th highest scoring team in my league, and I am currently 0-4, and I'm going to
Oh,
lose this
no.
week as well. Okay. So I'm glad it goes off points because I'm just outside the playoffs in the division, but I am yet to win a game in the league, to be honest. So I'm glad it has no outcome to it at all. I am genuinely sat at the bottom. I have the most points scored against me, but I am like the fourth highest scoring team. But my team is a bit battered in that one as well. I've got some really good players. I've got Baker Mayfield in my team's doing really well. I've got Justin Jefferson, he's flying. I've got Michael Pittman at the moment. I've also got Tyreek Hill in that league. So he's obviously got a bit downhill recently with the loss of Tua. Kyler Murray in the team, shock. I've got Alvin Kamara yet to play this week, but then I've also got Rashee Rice in the team who's now on IR. I've got Tua Tagovailoa on the team. He's on IR and stuff. So I'm sort of a bit thin this week, to be honest. I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 players on my team that are either out or on bye this week, So
Oh, no.
it's kind of taken a bit of a hit at the moment, but I'm quite happy with where I am. Again, I'm sort of just outside them playoff spots. What about the FFCC? How are you doing with that? Are you in the main bit, the intercontinental bit, or are you in the Squid Game? Or have you been knocked out?
I am not playing in that this year.
Oh,
Oh, naughty.
So I am 0-0.
I got knocked out last week of the main thing.
Oh,
So I'm not in
yeah.
anything now, I don't
Yeah,
think, am
right.
I? Which is a shame. Because this week my team put up 266 points.
Oh, wow.
But last week I put up 270 and I still couldn't win. So
Yeah, so I was the highest scoring team in week 1 in the FFCC, and then in the next week I came up against the highest scoring team in my division, so got knocked into the plate, and then I won the next 2, so I've gone on to the next round. But this is the lowest score my team's put up so far, and I put up 198 points. So,
Wow.
but I was saying that I've got Raheed Shaheed to play tonight, the sponsor of our show. So I'm quite happy with that one. I'm quite happy with my team in that one. I'm doing really well, and I've actually got Louis Rees-Zammit in that team as well. So if I go, I hope to win it with Louis Rees-Zammit in my team. I think that was a flyer. The Orkney Bowl. Are you guys in the Orkney Bowl?
yes. I was really
Really?
proud of my
Really bit of
FFPC
clarity.
team. Sorry,
Come
Paul,
on.
I'm putting in. I've drafted Jordan Mason with my very last pick. I was well pleased with that. Anyway, carry on.
And you were knocked out.
Yeah, but I was just well proud that I bet
you should. To be fair,
I
you
bet I'm
should
one
be
of the only
proud.
people, because at the time everyone thought it was Elijah Mitchell. Yeah.
Yeah, Elijah
Yeah,
Mitchell.
Elijah Mitchell.
Yeah, for some reason his first name got me confused. Anyway, everyone thought it was Elijah Mitchell, so he got drafted dead in, and I was like, I'm just going to add Mason on at the end. There's no one else. And then obviously I've got over 200 points every week, but can't seem to have stayed in, which is very upsetting. Orkney Bowl. I hadn't been doing very well in this, to be honest. But this week I seem to have been put up 230 points.
Well, I was buzzing in the Orkney Bowl this week because I woke up on Friday morning and I've got Kirk Cousins in my team. I've got Mike Evans in my team. I've got Kyle Pitts in my team. And I was like, whoa. And then I've got Joe Flacco in my team. He put up 51 points in this. And I was like, I'm absolutely flying here. I've even got Kyler Murray on my bench and he put up 40 points in this league. And there are 1, 2, 3 teams in my division that have put up more points than me, and I'm like, well, this is just why do we even play fantasy football, But I'm not doing the best in that league. I sort of seem to have a team that it either goes super high or I'm like 150 points and scraping along. So I'm not gonna do very well in this. I'm actually like nearly 250 points behind the highest score in the league. And the THFFBB, how are you guys doing in that one?
Not too badly. So I'm about to go to 3-2. Had a cracking week because I have the Kirk Drake London stack. So basically, it's great fun waking up after Thursday Night Football and being like, "Oh, I've won this." That was fun. But the team's looking all right actually. I'm missing Isaiah Pacheco, which is not ideal, but I do have Jonathan Brooks to come in relatively soon, and I've got the Dak Lamb stack and Kirk Drake London, Garrett Wilson coming into his own a little bit. Brian Robinson, who's obviously been one of the breakout players of the season. So yeah, 3-2 on the edge of playoffs. Could be okay in that.
Hannah, how about yourself?
No, it's not going well. I'm at the bottom of my league, and I'm not doing that great. I mean, to be fair, my team's not terrible, but I think they're all very mediocre. I don't have anyone who's kind of pushing the boat out, really. Like, I've got Tank Dell, who's not been doing that much recently. Keenan Allen, who obviously has been injured. I've got Jonathan Brooks, who obviously still hasn't played yet. Jalen Warren, who's been out for ages. My tight ends are pretty shoddy. I've got Isaiah Likely and Cade Otton. And that seems to be it. Not quite sure why I thought those two were a good idea on their own, but hey. So yeah, I don't think this is going to be my year.
No, I'm sort of middle of the bag with this one, and shockingly, I've got Rashi Rice on my bench who's on IR. So I think every charity league I've drafted him. So I've also got AJ Brown on that team as well, and he's out. So it's sort of one of them where. And I think that's a big thing with these fantasy leagues. There's a lot of luck in it. You know what I mean? You could draft a team and it hits, and then you can also draft a team where you go, oh, I've got, AJ Brown, Rashi Rice, I've got Bijan Robinson, and all of these, and you go, I'm flying high, and then a couple of injuries later, and all of a sudden there's not really much going on. Before we get into the next segment, any other charity leagues you guys want to mention before we move on?
Dog Bowl.
Wow.
Not because we're playing it. I just think it's fun to bring up the Dog Bowl.
I'm thinking of that. Yeah, in that league, I've got Deshaun Watson. And that's about the only person I draft in that league, But no, guys, let's move on to one of our next segments. What did we learn? This is a regular feature where we rewind on the week before to talk about what we've learned. So, what did we learn from week 5? I'll start us off. Backup running backs are almost as valuable as starting running backs now. I was having a look, excuse me, having a look at sort of teams that have these split backfields and where they're sharing the snaps. And, I've looked at some are like, 15 snaps and 5. I've not really put them in, but these are ones that are all a lot closer. So the Jags, the Patriots, the Dolphins, the Commanders, the Browns, the Broncos, and the Bucks, they were all teams this week that you saw 2 running backs, and they were very similar with snaps. Obviously, the yardage may have been a bit different and stuff, but they were very similar. And actually, I don't want to ruin what we're going to talk about in a little bit about a certain running back, but there were these sort of backup running backs. They seem to be very efficient with what they're doing, and I think they are starting to become a big part of these teams and what they can do, and they're actually becoming startable assets in your team as well. So, for me, backup running backs, do not be afraid to start them, because teams seem to be there's very few teams, and I don't know if you guys can answer that question. There's the only one I can really think of where there's one running back and I want to start him every week is sort of Saquon Barkley. Apart from that, there's not really. Maybe James Cook. You can make an argument for James Cook at the Bills, but go on.
It was exactly the question I was going to ask. I was having this conversation Sunday evening with my brother. Is how many actual and so it was because we were watching the Ravens, and the Ravens have the back who you think of as a bell cow, and he's not. They spell Derrick Henry all the time. How many actual bell cows are there in the NFL right now? I think the answer I came up with is 2. And I think it's just Saquon and Kyron Williams. I think that's it. Like, James Cook, as you say, gets the majority, but there's not really that many.
The only other one that springs to mind, I don't know if you can think of any, Hannah, is the only one is James Conner, and
Yeah.
he sort of gets the main workload in Arizona. Apart from that, I can't really think of any other teams. Can you, Hannah? Any?
Well, just in the short term, Jordan Mason would be my other guy. I mean, I think I think Garendo went in very occasionally yesterday, but he would be for me an automatic start. I mean, as CMC would be if he was there and healthy. I think that might be my only other one. I mean, what are your thoughts about Kyron Lewis? Kyron Williams?
I think he's absolutely unbelievable. He's such a strange player to watch because he's not particularly strong, he's not particularly fast, and I think if you don't understand sort of vision and patience, he can be a really confusing asset to watch. But it was really funny watching us. We got to the goal line last night, 2 Blake Corum runs, nothing, bringing Kyron for third down, immediate touchdown. Like, I think he might be the best goal line back in the NFL at the minute. And like I absolutely adore him. It just makes it all the more confusing as to why we drafted a running back in the 3rd round this year, because I think he's an absolute stud.
So follow-up question to that: who do you love more, Puka Nacua or Kyron Williams?
It's Puka Nacua. Like, I think the big question will be like, who do I love more, Puka Nacua or my mum? Like,
okay, who do you love more,
Puka or your fiance?
I'm getting a phone call. Actually, I actually can't answer that question. I choose.
Okay.
Oh, I see. Sorry, new report. The Texans have changed Nico Collins' injury designation from day to day to week to week.
There you go.
That sounds to me like he's going to be out next week.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what I learned is that backup running backs are actually really valuable, and I'm sure we will talk about a certain backup running back shortly. So, guys, what did we learn this week? What did you guys come up with, Lewis?
So my main thing is basically that at this point we have enough information about defenses and who's good at stopping what to be able to accurately predict which non-star assets are going to struggle. Obviously, so take the Jets game, for example. We know the Jets are a good defense. We know they have 2 shutdown corners. Justin Jefferson is always going to feast, like he's always going to thrive. But Jordan Addison was quite an obvious player that we thought would struggle. And so on my YouTube channel, I do weekly start sits, and looking through this week's, the starts I got DeAndre Swift right, which was good, but the other 3 were sort of middling. The sits, I got all 4 correct, like Sam Darnold, Zach Moss, Jordan Addison, Cole Kmet, all spot on. We have a lot of data in front of us to predict or to know which defenses are good at shutting down what. So obviously you continue to cite your studs, but with those sort of like mid-range players, you can predict, like you can look at this and go, Jordan Addison is going to get bullied by Sauce Gardner. Like there's stuff in front of us. We know if they're not studs, we can pretty accurately predict where they're going to struggle at this point. Watch now was in the scare of the week. We all completely get it wrong because maybe it's not that easy, but I think there's a lot of data in front of us to know like where matchups are going to be a problem at this point.
Yeah, it's where you can make a tactical decision, isn't it? And
yeah,
at the end of the day, Sauce is boss. Okay, Sauce is boss. Hannah, what did you learn?
So this week, I learned that studs are always going to be studs. So we have had some studs that have had some concerning starts to the season. We kind of discussed a couple of them earlier, but ones that come to mind certainly are like Jamar Chase, really slow to get going. Drake London, I think people were quite disappointed that he didn't seem to have done anything despite being kind of drafted at the kind of 1-2 turn. Garrett Wilson, obviously end of round 1 draft, really not really done anything at all to start the season. But this week they obviously showed why they are considered studs. So Chase finished as the overall wide receiver 1, Drake London the overall wide receiver 2, and Garrett Wilson the overall wide receiver 5. So these guys can be studs in their position, and I think we just have to have faith, trust in their workload and their talent that they will come through. I do think it is always tempting to bench like struggling studs, particularly like right at the beginning of the season, being like, oh, I drafted Jamar Chase, he's not doing anything. I don't feel comfortable starting him when I don't know. I'm trying to think of someone random that might not do a lot. I mean, let's just say Demarcus Robinson. He's now the wide receiver 1 in LA. I should play him over Jamar Chase, who clearly is not in condition and not doing anything. And I just think that it was more upsetting if he sits on your bench and puts up 40 points like he did this week than if he was in your lineup and maybe only gave you 10 points. I think these guys are studs and they're going to give you stud numbers. Maybe not every week. The NFL is unpredictable, but you drafted them in the first couple of rounds for a reason. And I think you've just got to hold the faith, and hope and know that they will come through for you at some point.
Yeah, it's always one of them things where if you take them in the first couple of the rounds, you sort of have to play them. And I know with redraft, you do get to that point where you're like, oh, you're frustrating me, and you wanna bench them, but they do come good. They do come good. But let's move on to our main feature. Each week we have 3 regular features, and that is the stud, scare, and wildcard. The stud is sort of a lower down player that we think is going to hit. A scare is a higher up player that we think is going to miss. And then a wild card is where we think of something absolutely bonkers and go crazy. And Lewis came up with an idea that we were going to add a forfeit to this. So we are keeping track of points. Lewis, can you update us on points? How we all doing?
I can. So going into this week, I have 3 points. Remember, it's golf, so obviously you want the lowest points possible. I have 3, Hannah has 4, and Paul, you have 5. So it is really all to play for. We're all, one bad week, and you can go from first to worst.
Yep. I think that week's coming for you, mate.
I think it is.
But yeah, so the forfeit for the loser is they have to open the first show after the Super Bowl with a monologue of the other 2 hosts choosing. I can't wait for Lewis to do one about his love for me and Hannah. That's going to be amazing. But let's start off with the stud of the week. We will start by talking about our last week's studs, and I'm going to start with you, Hannah. Hannah, you went for Dontavian Wicks, who finished as the wide receiver 68 with 4 points. Not a great turnout. I went for Caleb Williams, who finished as a QB 5 this week with 23.6 points. And Lewis, mate, do you know what? I remember you saying this, and I was shocked when I looked at the numbers. You said Tank Bigsby, who actually finishes the RB1 on the week with 25.9 points. Absolutely nailed it. You know what? Yep, I'm with you there. I'm with you. Take a bow.
Do you know what's sad about this? So first of all, to talk about Tank a little bit, like the underlying numbers, I did a little thread last week that like he was first in the league. This is before the RB1 finish. He was first in the league in yards per attempt. He was first in the league in yards after contact per attempt. He was 5th in PFF rushing grade. Like the underlying numbers were clearly there for Tank Bigsby. The most annoying thing is that I've set up this format that means that Hannah's obviously going to get the point here. I correctly predicted the RB1 from an underrated player, and Paul, we get the same thing. We get the same reward for this.
Yeah, this is where you fell down, Lewis.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get the other 2 points. So
sucks to be you. But I just want to add a quick mention to Hannah, because when Tank Bigsby was drafted, I'm sure you put him as your flag plant, which was like last year. And I feel like you nailed it. You were just 12 months too early.
Yeah, probably. But this year we did who are your favourite people to, like, your under the radar people to draft?
Yeah.
And Bigsby was my running back.
So you know,
so far it's looking good.
Do you know what? Fair play to you. Fair play. You know, I remember you saying it like 12 months ago, where you were like, he was your guy and stuff, and I think it's taken the time, but he's there, and but no. So let's talk about our studs for this week. Lewis, you predicted the RB1 last week. Who are we going for this week?
I've decided to go to the tight end position.
Oh my god.
And yeah, I know. And well, there's a little bit of theory behind this, which is that if the player that I'm talking about gets a touchdown, they finish as like a top 4 tight end, and therefore I can argue that that I'm not the loser on the week. We mentioned earlier it was a slightly better game for my player this week. And that's Mark Andrews. Obviously been like maybe the bust of the season. Like there've been a lot of problems with the players drafted in the first round, but the majority has been through injury, right? Whether it's CMC getting injured or whether it's Tua getting injured and sort of tanking Tyreek's value or all of the other injuries. Mark Andrews is healthy. He's just not doing anything. But the Commanders Ravens game has the highest over under of the week. It's going to be an offensive frenzy, and both of these teams are really susceptible through the air. So I think there's going to be a lot of passing on show. And Mark Andrews was way more involved in the passing game this week. Now, it is kind of in short yardage situations and more likely playing as an inline tight end rather than when you get Isaiah Likely playing out of the slot or weirdly like a Charlie Kohler 40-yard touchdown playing out wide. But I think there's a chance, Mark Andrews, that this is sort of a get-right game in a really high over-under. And like I said, if he gets 3 catches for 25 yards and a touchdown, he's probably like the tight end 3 on the week. So I think there's a little bit of theory behind it, but I'm hoping Mark Andrews is starting to ramp up.
Yeah, and what makes me laugh about this is if you'd have made this pick 6 weeks ago, we'd have gone, you are not picking Mark Andrews as the stud of the week, but because he's been so trash, it's like, yeah, he's sort of the under radar player right now that you think that could have a good week because he's been that trash. Hannah, what about yourself? Who's your stud of the week?
So I'm going to go for Darnell Mooney. Now, hear me out. I know he's had quite, a reasonable fantasy performance so far, but I think he's another guy where people have not really been paying attention. He's not an exciting wide receiver. And I think people are really focused on Drake London and Kyle Pitts. And I don't think they're noticing like how involved Darnell Mooney has been and how much of a big part of that Falcons offense he is. He's had a 25% target share over the past 4 weeks. They're playing the Panthers in week 6, and they're 10th in points allowed to opposing wide receivers so far this season. So they're in the top 3rd. So I think this is a good matchup for him, and I think he's going to have a good week.
I completely agree. And I think the only people that have noticed Darnell Mooney are the people that have him on their fantasy teams.
Yeah, and I bet you anything, in these short bench leagues, he's on waivers, like loads of waivers. And there's, again, loads of buys this week. He's like the perfect guy. I'd even keep him. He's not a guy that I would play just for this 1 week and drop him again. Like, he's a guy to keep.
I mean, he was the wide receiver 3 this week, and he's currently the wide receiver 15 on the season. But when you actually look into it, that it's not been sort of really, the targets have been absolutely unbelievable, but wide receiver 90, then 18, 27, 50, and then 3. It's just generally quite a low scoring season in terms of passing. He also, I was looking into some ADOT data earlier today, and I think he has the 2nd highest ADOT in the league on people with over 25 targets on the season. So the point of Darnell Mooney is that he only really needs 1, and then he can perform. So I like this one.
He's a Rashid Shaheed, right? Maybe he could be our new sponsor. What do you think?
He's a wannabe Shaheed. No, Rashid Shaheed has too fun of a name to ever replace.
That's true. I do think people probably say, you're chasing points from last week. But I genuinely think, right, if you don't go and look at the list of where wide receivers finished this week, nobody would put Darnell Mooney as a top 10 wide receiver on the week. Nobody.
Well, that's because he wasn't. Oh, no, he was. No, he's
wide
receiver 3. Sorry, I was right. Yeah. No, you're right. No, I'm sorry. I got confused thinking that I just said wide receiver 15, but that was on the season.
Yeah, so Hannah, I'm going to take your theory this week, and I'm going to go for Dontavian Wicks as my stud of the week. I think he's going up against a team that like to be scored upon, and I think he could be somebody that, kind of a bit like Lewis's theory, I think if he could get 3 or 4 targets for about 40 yards and a touchdown, he's going to be somebody that finishes higher than wide receiver 68 this week. So I'm going. Go on, you're going to say something?
No, I think it's a great pick because he had the highest target share on the Packers this week. He just didn't manage to actually convert that to targets or receptions and useful fantasy points. So I think his time is still coming.
Yeah.
So although I took the point, I think still the theory, was correct.
A fair amount of that as well in terms of Wicks having watched the game was the Rams pass rush was really getting to Jordan Love, so there were a few of the targets that it was more Love than it was actually Wicks. There was one drop, but it was the pass rush was the problem. And just to clarify, when Paul said he's playing a team that like to get passed against, it's the Cardinals, so he knows that they like to get passed on. So yeah, I really like this one for Wicks, and I think he was like the waiver wire pickup for week 5. So I think a lot of people might drop him disappointed, and I think there's a chance for that squeaky wheel narrative going into week 6.
100%, and he's going to do it. And a bit like Hannah always says, it's a win-win. If he doesn't do it against the Cardinals and we win again, winner. If he does do it against the Cardinals, winner. Because I'm not going to get a point. Win-win.
Way to go.
What have I learned this year? Always listen to Hannah. She's always bloody right.
There you are.
But yeah, let's get on to our fantasy scares of the week. This is where we pick somebody that's quite high up and think that they're going to be a scare. So you sit them. I'm going to go in the sort of similar order. I said Justin Jefferson. I'm going to take this as he was decent. He's still, wide receiver 19 for Justin Jefferson is not the best of weeks. He did score you 15.2 points. So you're fairly happy you just didn't have a Justin Jefferson kind of week where he puts up millions of points. Lewis, you went for Malik Neighbors.
Yep. So
he was that good of a scare, mate, that he didn't bother playing.
I actually, Sunday morning, drafted a message to you guys to be like, hey, Malik Neighbors isn't playing. That's my bad. I'll go with, and then started having a look to figure out who I was going to go with. And I was like, nah, just take the point, Lewis. Like, you took a risk, but it'll be 2 weeks in a row that I've taken the point on the scare by choosing someone by just fucking up. Like, Malik Neighbors didn't play last week. I went for a Seahawks running back when they played on Monday Night Football. Like, I'm just taking points by just not properly understanding the format.
See,
your own format.
Hannah, he's totally like okay with this at the moment, but when he realizes he's gone from first place to joint last at the end of this, he's going to start changing and start paying more attention again.
Because I've seen what I think is going to happen to the Predictions League this week, and I think that's quite fun.
But yeah, Hannah, you absolutely smashed this one.
Yeah,
you
well
went for Breece Hall, who was one of the arguments for the running back 1 to be taken off the boards this off season, and he finishes the running back 37 with 6.7 points. So you absolutely smashed it. I hope everyone listened to you and benched Breece Hall this week and started Tank Bigsby, as Lewis said, and you'd have just been owning your leagues. Nobody did that, by the way. So, but yeah, so Hannah, well done to you. Lewis, you've got a point for that one because you just pick players that don't play. But let's get into our scare of the week this week. Lewis, who are you starting with?
So I've gone for Brandon Ayuk, which I think is quite a bold one, going off the fact he's just had his get right game. And I think he went for over 100 yards in the first half. They're playing against the Seahawks, who have a really good secondary and a good pass rush as well, actually. But the secondary is really scary. And the main point here why I've gone for Brandon Ayuk is because he is obviously the most conventional wide receiver that they have. So I think definitely when you're playing against you have two really strong man-to-man corners, you can use Debo in a lot of sort of crossing routes and getting him yards after the catch. George Kittle doing the same thing. But I think there's a world in which Devon Witherspoon can take Brandon Ayuk out of the game. So I think that's why I've gone for him for this week.
I love this pick. I do love this pick, and I do think he's going to have a tough time against Weatherspoons. I think he's going to have a tough time against Weatherspoons.
We've all had a tough time in Weatherspoons, haven't we?
We've all had a tough time with Weatherspoons. Hannah, who's your pick for this week? Me and you have gone for the same game, haven't we?
We have, same team as well. So I'm going to go Baker Mayfield. They're playing the Saints, obviously division rival. Saints have been in a little bit of a slump the last few weeks compared to their kind of fiery start on offense anyway. But the defense have been really strong against opposing quarterbacks, and they've given up the 4th fewest fantasy points to that position. I just think the Saints defense is really a nice solid unit, and I know that Baker Mayfield can sometimes have those games where he's just not quite on point and he struggles, and I think this could be one of them. And I think the Saints would love to be able to kind of get back on top and show that they're this fiery team with a great offense again against their division rivals. So I'm going to say that Baker Mayfield is going to be a scare next week.
I absolutely love that. And like I said, I've gone for the same game and the same team for sort of the same theory. I think the Bucs Saints is always a bit of a hard hitting game, and it could be anything. I've gone for the running back Bucky Irving, and I think a lot of people are starting to see he's getting a bigger workload, and he's starting to take over away from Rashad White, and I just think people need to pump the brakes a little bit and sort of go, let's chill. He's still a bit raw at the moment, and I think he's going to have a tough time against that Saints defense. So I go tread cautiously with him this week, and I think he's in for a tough week. But let's get on to the wild card of the week. So this week, Lewis, you said the Raiders and the Broncos would finish with less than 1.5 offensive touchdowns. You were wrong with that one. They had 5.
Very wrong as well.
Yeah, mate. Bo Nix did more than that on his own. He rushed for 1 and threw 2, So,
yeah.
And you also said Aaron Rodgers doesn't pass for a touchdown in London. And that one was wrong as well. He passed for 2. So you didn't do so well with it. Say again?
Still lost, though.
Yeah, he still lost, but, he still passed for touchdowns, Hannah, you said that Sam Darnold would throw 2 interceptions in London. Unfortunately, that was wrong as well. He only threw 1. But you said Garrett Wilson would finish with more fantasy points than Justin Jefferson. That was correct. Garrett Wilson had 29.1 points, as we mentioned earlier. He was wide receiver 5 on the week. Was it 5 Wilson was, or 3? I can't remember what you said. But but Justin Jefferson had 15.2 points. Now, I said the Jags would lose and Doug Peterson would get sacked. That was wrong. They actually won their first game of the season. Was it their first one? So I think they want me to predict that more often. And I also said that Caleb Williams would pass and rush for a touchdown. And I'm saying that's correct because he did rush for a touchdown. It was just called back on a dodgy tackle. So I'm not going to take a loss for that one, okay? Because he did it, in my opinion. What helped at that point, I was super excited, and then it was called back. And then Kev, our leader, messaged to say, lol, it's just been called back to rub it in as well. So thanks, Kev. Appreciate you.
No, I'm more than happy to take the point for this one because as much as even if we were technically both wrong, I was more wrong. So I'm perfectly happy to take the point for Wildcard.
I'm glad you were because I was full on ready to argue my case.
I know. I could see it on your face.
so I'm glad you're happy to take the point. And before we move on, I just want to say that I've had no points this week. Okay.
Wow, that's a miracle.
So this doesn't happen very often. So
we need to celebrate.
I'm just going to mini Mexican wave this like Chandler Bing and just
this is what happens when you're very middling, isn't it?
Yeah.
You just happen to float undetected. You're not good, but you're not the worst.
if
That's Paul this week.
That's proper harsh, you know. I've nailed it, and you're like, yeah, you're just middle of the bag. You're not great. You're not shit, you know.
But Lewis nailed it right with the overall running back one as his stud. I
Brilliant.
nailed it as Breece Hall being a scare.
Brilliant.
And Paul, you were just the least wrong in Wildcard.
And that means I get no points, which means I've gone from being last to joint last.
Well, that's what I was going to say. If listeners have been paying attention, that now means that at the end of week 5, it is Lewis 5 points, Paul 5 points, Hannah 5 points, which is brilliant. We've played for 5 weeks and we've got nowhere.
To be fair, though, it shows that at least we're all kind of reasonable. Nobody's like bombing it, unlike Paul in previous seasons. He's clearly improving.
I am. Thanks for texting me my predictions for this week, Hannah. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, no worries.
But yeah, let's get on to our wildcards for next week. Lewis, who have you got as your wildcard pick?
So I've gone for Drake May wins in his first start versus the Texans. I think, look, it's just fun to be excited about rookie quarterbacks, and I think the whole team's going to galvanize behind him. There's also a chance that he just gets absolutely crushed and takes like 10 sacks. But it's Drake. I really like Drake May as a prospect, so I think he gets the win. Then for the second one, for the fantasy one, I've said that Jaden Reed and Marvin Harrison Jr. both finish as top 10 wide receivers in this exciting matchup that we mentioned earlier. I was debating between Packers Cardinals and Ravens Commanders for this because they're both super exciting. But I think MHJ and Jaden Reed are both going to finish as top 10 wide receivers.
I love it. I hope you're right. And I seen somewhere a stat that basically said the rookie quarterbacks between them have 10 wins or something so far this season. And it's the first time since like the 70s or something that 3 rookies have come in and put that many wins together this far into the league and stuff. So yeah, I hope you're right about Drake May. I hope that he hits the ground running. Hannah, what have you gone for this week?
So I thought let's do a London theme again this week for my first one because we're back in London for Jags versus Bears. So I'm going to be bold and say that Trevor Lawrence throws for 3 touchdowns in London this week. I think it's impossible/improbable, so that's the fun of it. Now this next one sounds really kind of obvious and not very unlikely, but it has not happened yet so far, surprisingly. So my next one is that Jaden Daniels finishes as the overall QB1, obviously for fantasy, in week 6. So the highest he's been so far is QB3, and that was in week 1. So he hasn't actually been the overall QB1 yet any week this season.
I really like this. I think this is quite as you just explained, he hasn't actually done it this season, but like Lewis just said, we've got a couple of big games in that, you know, the game that he's in with Lamar Jackson, you know, you could see either one of them doing it, you know, rushing all the time, scoring touchdowns, rushing for touchdowns. There's quite a few big high scoring games out there. And I think this week was a really high scoring week for QBs. So I really like that pick, to be honest. I think that's quite a good one. So I've gone for Malik Neighbors and Jamar Chase to have over 16 receptions between them in Sunday Night Football, which is the Bengals and the Giants. Now, I'm not going to predict the Bengals to win. I did actually write that in earlier, but then I deleted it because Hannah would get really angry with me.
Well, I'm still upset with you, Paul, because you put a message while the game was going on saying, welcome back to the NFL Bengals, and I refused to answer because I knew the game wasn't over, and then you jinxed it and they lost.
I just thought they looked really good, okay? I just thought they were doing really well, and it was nice for them to turn up to the 2024 season.
Yeah, well, they did, and then they failed.
Well, that beyond your
not
head
to turn up anymore because you sent me a message.
So it was me. It wasn't your head coach making some dodgy calls. It was me. I was the one that lost it for the Bengals on Sunday night.
Exactly.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm changing it now. I hope the Bengals lose to the Giants.
You put your voodoo on. Well, I'd rather that than us be middling and get a rubbish pick next draft season. So fine.
But yeah, so I'm going for Malik Neighbors and Jamar Chase to have over 60 receptions between them. And my other one is, I think, Bo Nix continues his winning ways and leads the Broncos to 4-2. They play the Chargers this week. So I think he continues his winning ways and takes them to 4-2, which nobody saw happening at the start of this season.
Which is mad. And they seem to never be playing a good team. But Bo Nix has been way better than I thought he would be. I mean, he's still not great, but he's been playing way better football than I thought he would.
He's great for fantasy.
Is he?
Yeah. Yeah, because he's scoring rushing touchdowns. You know, what did he have this week? 2 passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown.
Let's have a look, because I haven't really been paying attention to him as a fancy asset. He is the QB 15 on the season. He was a QB 8 this week. I mean, he's not finished inside the top 12 at all, but QB 8 this week's pretty nice.
But QB 15, that's a good high-end QB 2 on the season.
Yeah, I mean, it's higher than what players like Goff, Lawrence, Anthony Richardson. Weird.
Told you. He's the future. But no, I do think he wins again this week. And I think the Broncos at 4-2 is something that nobody predicted at the start of the season. 6 games in. But with that brings us to the end of our show. We would like to thank you all for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe and follow us over on X at Wildcard Rewind, and head over to the YouTube channel, search for @Fantasy Wildcard, and make sure you give us a like and a subscribe while you're there. And we will see you all next week when we chat about week 6.
Say